All right, everybody. It is Steve with the Rogue Scholar, and I've got my good friend and former RP live streamer, writer, etc., Mike Sainato, who has now turned a new leaf and is really, really heavily focused on writing about labor issues. You can see his writing at his own Substack, and you can also catch him at The Guardian. Without further ado, Mike Sainato, welcome to the Rogue Scholar, sir.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Dude, it's been a long time, man. Last time I spoke
Yeah.
to you, good God, man. So much has changed. But tell me about what got you writing in the labor space before we dive into the subject.
Um, a few years ago, there was a big fight with Disney workers in Florida and California fighting for a $15 minimum wage. And, covering that in Florida, it was really being ignored not only by the local media outlets, but by national media outlets. And it was really frustrating to try to fight to even place that with publications that just were completely oblivious to the issue, the editors. I did get a story into Vice news about that, and it was just really annoying and frustrating, the delay and just having to kind of fight with on the back end and with the front end to get people to pay attention to it. And obviously Bernie was the only politician to really stand with those workers, and address the issue. So I just took off from there. I kind of jumped into a rabbit hole and haven't left since. And still, there's so many issues and workers and fights, union organizing, negative things happening to workers and positive things that workers are doing to kind of push back and change their working conditions that really flies under the radar on a local, state, and national level.
So let me go into that for a minute. Obviously, we've seen the Biden administration has done next to nothing in support of labor. And we've seen that really, quite frankly, the Democrats have come up rolling goose eggs, much like they did with Hillary. Looks like Biden is largely a very, very similar animal, very, very Republican friendly, business friendly, not labor friendly, not poverty friendly. I mean, he's really not done. I mean, he said nothing would fundamentally change, and he's kept his word. Nothing has fundamentally changed. But you're seeing from the streets, and I talk to Jordan Sheraton frequently, and Jordan is out there covering these labor issues as well. Tell me what gives you hope from the labor market, and if anything, that labor is making a rebound.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, there's not a lot of optimism out there. The PRO Act keeps getting thrown around, and it doesn't seem like there's any, grounds to getting that passed anytime in the near future. Possibly getting some things put into legislation, but I mean, it's very frustrating from a political standpoint. And yeah, the NLRB has seen, some positives coming out of it with the new administration, but you're comparing that to what was on under Trump. And based on the statistics from the BLS that came out, unionization rates and membership rates declined last year despite a surge in worker militancy. And that's the optimism that's coming out of this. And you've been seeing that for months and months and months. The great talks about the great resignation, people quitting, but on that doesn't really do much for organizing. If people are just leaving to take different jobs or new jobs, I think that's kind of an opportunity for the labor movement to capitalize on it. And obviously, based on the numbers, they're not doing that, but there are specific industries. You know, we're watching Starbucks stores across the country file for union petitions. That's a positive thing, and I think that we're going to see more of that, especially if these stores continue adding um, unions across the U.S. Amazon is rerunning their election, and that's a huge uphill battle. But I think that's going to be a big thing coming forward because so many workers work for that company. There is so many issues in terms of how they treat workers, how they take, how they approach employment with huge turnovers and huge injuries. There's all these different fronts where there are workers and organizing happening, but it's just so small comparative to the massive problems we face with income inequality. Rents are soaring right now. Uh, Health insurance, those issues are not resolved in terms of underinsured and uninsured people, and people being able to afford basic necessities. Unfortunately, you can go ahead, Steve.
No, so what exactly is it that you see actually spurring organization? Because I've had Sarah Nelson from the airlines union come on here. I've had her top lawyer and Joe Burns come on here. I've had Jeff Reisberg come on here. I've had a bunch of Marianne Garceau come on here to talk about labor organizing. Each has a slightly different angle on this, but honestly, it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot to get excited about. I mean, it seems like that is the most efficient path to making noise for labor, for the 99%, quite frankly, because a lot of what benefits the rest of society tends to come from the organization of labor unions, and that matriculates out to society. I just don't see it, man. I mean, as much as there was barely a blip on the radar with people talking about a general strike. There was barely a blip on the radar with anything. And part of that, I'm sure, is a direct result of mainstream media not doing its job, or effectively doing its job for capital to keep that stuff quiet. But on the other hand, though, I'm genuinely not seeing enough of that energy to make the kind of change. I mean, what other signs of encouragement, if you will, are you seeing? Because it is very small. And I know there's been a lot of laws that have been put on the books to make unionizing, quite frankly, very challenging.
Yeah, and that's still the case. Workers, have their rights aren't protected. The Economic Policy Institute did an analysis, a couple of years ago, how much money employers pour into union busting, what they get away with. They break the law over, half the time in ahead of union elections. I mean, you saw that with Amazon. They clearly broke the law. The National Labor Relations Board said they did, but all they get is another election. There's no fines. There's no actual repercussions. They just have to do it all over again. It's kind of ridiculous and disappointing. The tables are tilted in favor of employers when it comes to union organizing. Uh, and with income and wealth inequality, that's just gotten worse and worse and worse. And you see it time and time again with all these companies who, whether it's Starbucks, whether it's REI right now, where a store in New York City just filed for a union election, and they present themselves as this progressive company. They're a co-op, and they're anti-union. It's just ridiculous. So I think the positives coming out from all that is people are starting to learn and get aware of the, for lack of a better term, the bullshit of corporate, propaganda and corporate talking points, and they're union busting. Yes, more, unions have a positive favorability, based on polls more than in the past 65 years. But what do you do with that? How do you take that support and turn it into victories? And I think that's just something that the labor movement's still trying to figure out. Which there's all sorts of different problems and concerns with itself in terms of leadership, bureaucracy, things like that. But um, I think it's just something the progressive movement is starting to take notice of, that labor is how important it is, how it's intrinsically linked to all these different progressive issues that people care about, and that something needs to be done. So I think hopefully you know this year, and in the recent near future, groups and workers and unions start to kind of wake up and develop that. But like you said, right now there's not a lot to get hopeful about it. I think it just comes to just finding and grabbing onto the small victories you can find, the small organizing efforts, the small battles, and supporting and trying to get involved in those those things as they come.
So you write both for your own Substack, and I see you frequently putting stuff out in the Guardian. What are some of the stories you're tracking on right now, Mike?
Right now I'm still, covering ways, employers are still pushing, oh, we have labor shortages. And I think that kind of lost steam because people realized how BS that is, considering, what the data shows and how wages have remained stagnant and employers still continue treating workers like crap and paying workers like crap while their executives are working from home and making millions and millions and millions of dollars. Um, you know, um, I don't want to kind of give away the stories I have filed already and working on, but right now in Seattle, the concrete workers are doing a general strike throughout the industry. They're fighting back uh, against these employers that basically have a monopoly on the industry, and they're trying to beat concessions out of the workers. And right now they're at a standstill, and construction jobs throughout Seattle are getting halted because they have no concrete. And I think that's something that is flying under the radar. No one's talking about it. There's a story in the Nation about it. Other than that, Seattle Times covered it, but they really covered it from the perspective of uh, the people that own businesses that are impacted by it, rather than kind of digging into the labor battle. And then moving on from that, just ongoing union organizing efforts. One of those being 2,500 nurses at the University of Wisconsin Health System, which is probably right now the largest nurses organizing effort in the country. And what they're doing right now is they're trying to kind of push back and find loopholes, because Scott Walker, 10 years ago passed Act 10, and that kind of strict collective bargaining rights for public sector workers. And they used to have a union. Contract expired in 2014, and now they're trying to push for voluntary recognition and kind of trying to raise as much noise as possible amid, nurses are dealing with short staffing. Employers are claiming there's a huge nursing shortage, but the reality is employers have cut costs and won't invest into hiring and retaining and keeping nurses in their positions, and listening to what nurses need in the workplace throughout all these different COVID surges and all the different, on top of the regular issues they're faced with in hospitals.
So when you look at the concrete issue in Seattle, I mean, is this a supply chain issue where they're just not getting enough of the real resource that they need to be able to do the work, and so therefore they can't do the work, so they don't have
No, that they have
jobs? Is that kind of it?
they have the concrete. They're just their employers that they work the contracts with. They're trying to get concessions out of them in terms of healthcare, They're not the wage increases they're proposing is not keeping up with the high cost of living in Seattle. Seattle's a booming area. For a while, they had the most construction cranes of any city in the U.S. Now they're second behind D.C., but it's still a sprawling gentrification. There's these huge construction projects that these workers are dealing with. They work throughout the pandemic. They work long hours. um, it's a constant issue, and on the face of that, these employers and the union has said they view this as these employers are just kind of shrugging their shoulders, refusing to negotiate or actually come to a deal with these workers in hopes that they can bankrupt the local, break the union, and basically start to get unions out of the construction industry in Seattle because, um, it's in the way of their profits, and in the way of having an author, their monopoly and an authoritarian voice in their own workplaces.
So, Mike, tell me if you wouldn't mind a little bit about the Amazon efforts to organize. I mean, I've seen various things happening in New York, with Jordan's coverage. What are some of the other things you've noticed with Amazon's unionization efforts?
Um, you know, the New York unionization effort's been going on for a while. And obviously in Staten Island, uh, with Chris Smalls, who was fired early on in the pandemic. He's leading that effort. So that's kind of like a grassroots effort. They're trying to get union authorization cards, and then the big hurdle they've come across is that the attrition rates of workers in that warehouse is so high. So, if you look on an Amazon jobs website, you don't even have to fill out a resume. You put in your name, number, and then you're basically brought in. They kind of basically churn workers in and out. Um, basically because the nature of the work and how brutal it is. People burn out on a regular basis. People last, a day or two, maybe a few months. Maybe they're workers, like we saw in Nomad Land, that they're just working, seasonally, just because they're already in economic precarious situations. So Amazon, kind of preys upon a weak um, source of a source of exploited workers, where the workers typically are have very little job experience or experience in other exploited sectors like retail, service industry, and it's just churning and burning. A lot of these warehouses have over 100% attrition rates. It's ridiculous. Um, and then
100%
going
attrition. How do you even stay in business with 100% attrition? That's
they
amazing.
they they get so many people just in and out. You're just always hiring, always replacing those workers that are leaving on a regular basis.
So just
It's
Just as a point of reference, I worked as a project manager for the Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency, the bloodsuckers that would be the student debt industry collecting monies and stuff. And one of the big projects that they had was, in fact, this putting in a new system to make it so that the actual end users could have, access to great new services, because they were working with like crazy green screens where they had to twist their hands in all kinds of funky combinations to press these special keys just to operate in this old mainframe application. They had 197% attrition because the people could make more flipping burgers at McDonald's than they could actually answering calls in the student loan servicing center. That should give you an idea of some of the stuff that's going on. I don't know. I don't think if they unionize, I would be blown away. But bottom line is that this attrition thing ain't going away. I think people have gotten fed up with it. I'm just wondering when it will show up in actually, union representation and seeing labor come together, because we've become fiercely independent with this whole libertarian strain of life that has come through the doors lately. I mean, it's been going for a long time, but it's really picking up steam. I think cryptocurrency and other things like that have put libertarians way out in front on a lot of this stuff, and that doesn't bode well for collective organizing at all.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge obstacle when it comes to organizing at places like Amazon, because you're losing so many workers and so many new workers are coming in, so you're constantly having to um, double up and double down on organizing efforts, and I think that's um, and on top of dealing with massive anti-union campaigns. I think that's what happened at Bessemer in Alabama initially. Besides Amazon overtly breaking the law, they installed a mailbox, held captive audience meetings on a regular basis. But to get to that initial election, the union had to get a majority of their pool of workers to sign union authorization cards. And from the point that they got those cards and they filed, obviously there was a big discrepancy between the vote results and who signed those cards initially. And a big problem with that is a lot of those workers likely left from the leading up to the holiday season to afterwards. And just a constant issue at Amazon, and one that favors them. But I think going forward with this new union election, I mean, tonight there's a media press conference about the new organizing efforts. The election starts in a couple of weeks. It's a mail-in ballot election. Um, you know, uh, Rerun elections typically favor the employers. The results aren't great, but given how much attention that this union election received last year, I don't think you can compare it to past statistics, just because of all eyes are going to be on this Alabama election, and I don't think other warehouses are at that point yet where they're ready to hold elections. The one in New York City filed for one and had to pull out the petition for a union election, just because the people who signed cards, they had so much attrition rates. And there is organizing in terms of Amazon workers in Chicago. They've held strikes just recently over changes, and fought to win raises and changes to working conditions. And there are, in different Amazon areas and warehouses, local groups of workers trying to push back and fight back against Amazon, and they're not necessarily um, focusing towards the goal of petitioning and organizing a formal union with the National Labor Relations Board, but there are developing and trying to build worker groups within local communities where Amazon is operating in places like Chicago, and the Portland area. There's one in California. There's some, and every couple of weeks there's a new issue in terms of what Amazon's doing, a new lawsuit, something like that. And it's ridiculous, and I don't think that's going to change. And unfortunately, I don't. I think a big part of it is politically. Who is stepping up and pressuring Amazon in terms of their monopoly practices are just ridiculous. What they did with diapers.com, and what they do with employers, with competitors. Their just business practices are so uh, it's just ridiculous, and there's not enough support to kind of step up to people like Jeff Bezos, who are just really, really, really exploiting of not only workers but smaller businesses and consumers. And it's just disheartening to kind of see the same things playing out over and over and over.
You bring up a good point, and I go back to when Amazon was trying to go into New York, and AOC really raised the ruckus for once, and really kind of gave Amazon, a run. I mean, literally rallied the troops, and voila, there's no Amazon. What do you think it will take, like beyond AOC? Because I mean, maybe she's doing great things behind the scenes. I don't see it, and I don't see any of them, to your point, actively working to organize labor in any way, shape, or form, or working on behalf of labor. I don't see any of that. None of that. Is there anybody? Is there a hidden gem? Is there someone out there fighting for labor that we don't see?
I mean, Bernie is still like, I think Bernie today is having another like seminar with different workers, and I think just even doing that, you don't see elected officials doing that enough. It's just using their giant platforms to highlight and showcase workers' fights, their struggles, and I really would like to see them doing more about that. And I don't know, what the reason is for that. Whether it's just their comms or PR people are just focused on different things or just kind of oblivious to these issues. But I think that that's just a really important thing that how that not only people in media like myself, but progressives and supporters of you know certain elected officials need to kind of start pressuring and just asking, like, can you do this, can you um it comes to it's going to come to these elected officials getting pressured to do it or getting asked to do it, because right now the labor unions and the labor movement don't really, they don't have the resources to compete with all the kinds of different PR that companies are paying for and marketing that they're doing. Even with the media now, I think it's like 5 publicists exist for what every single journalist, and those publicists are getting paid tons of money and given tons of resources to just throw down crap down people's throats, the public's throats, and or fight people like me, or stonewall people like me who are trying to hold corporations accountable for how they treat workers. um
Chevron just put out an ad looking for journalists to write in their newsroom to basically create pro Chevron propaganda to put out there as if it were real news, but it's nothing but propaganda. It's nothing but basically an infomercial for how great they are. I mean, this is what we're up against. These people have money on loan from God, and they have no reason whatsoever to bring on a Mike Sainato and say, "Hey, go ahead, please write about the unfair labor practices. Please, yes, write about this. Please write about that." They have no incentive whatsoever to do that. In fact, they're dumping millions upon millions of dollars to do exactly the opposite of that, to laud what great, uh, you know, global citizens they are. It's kind of unbelievable. It's beyond idiocracy. It's beyond don't look up. I mean, we're talking about some really, really nefarious stuff here being passed off as journalism. What are your thoughts on that?
it's ridiculously frustrating. I mean, in the New York Times, you can look up, they have paid posts by companies like Shell on, and it's just ridiculous propaganda. But the fact that that opportunity is given to corporations like that, you see it in Politico or Axios. This is presented by whatever nefarious company. And it's something political, and these news organizations are, yeah, they're trying to, you know, get money, and there are issues in terms of digital how digital media has been, you know, basically exploited by companies like Google and Facebook. Um, but it's just gotten ridiculous to the point how much companies are involved in just manipulating, or intervening or undermining the work of journalism and media outlets, and how many huge media outlets are willing to sacrifice their journalistic values or ethics that normally, for an average person, that would never be the case, but for companies that they bend and break the rules all the time.
Right.
And that's just going from that doesn't even include just the typical favoritism of corporations and businesses, and the powerful people compared to the people who are impacted, or the public and workers. How all these different stories are distorted. You see it time and again in outlets like the Wall Street Journal. I saw the other day they did a story on how raising rent is skyrocketing, but it's framed as it's a great time to own an apartment. Like, so who is that for? Who the fuck is owning an apartment? It's the rich people.
Exactly. Hey, so we have a question. I want to see if I can get it. It's from Julie. Bring it up here just a second. Regarding the truckers, I'll put this up here for you. Have you had any exposure to the trucker transportation strike?
Um, I don't know exactly what she's referring to. I know in Colorado, truckers were really raising hell in terms of, there's a truck driver who got a sentence of over 100 years because what basically boiled down to whether it was a mistake and or faulty brake equipment or things like that is a tragedy. And they ultimately refused to go into Colorado, and the sentence for that person was, I think, reduced to something like 10 years. And trucking is facing a lot of different issues in terms of, for years and years and years, wages have been depressed. Even recently, the industry has always complained about truck driver shortages, and the issue is the pay is terrible, the benefits are terrible, and the employers have been misclassifying drivers as independent contractors. There's an organizing effort in the Port of Los Angeles at XPO Logistics. The Teamsters are trying to organize those truck drivers who have been misclassified as independent contractors. And that launched somewhat recently, that campaign, and that's ongoing. Um, you know, just other than that, across the country, I think it used to be typical, based on inflation, for a truck driver to make like six figures or close to it, and now, you know, they're making half that in many cases, on top of being kind of locked into having to pay for their own truck. Things like that. The tight delivery times, the lack of access to bathrooms, and I've covered this for the Guardian. Um, you know, my last story that went in the Guardian was about on a close to almost 1,000 truck drivers die on the road every year. More than that, just because those statistics are just based on like accidents and deaths on the job, and not including like when a driver gets sick or dies of natural causes while hundreds of miles away from their family. And in a lot of those cases, employers are basically telling families to go fuck themselves. So they have to figure out how to pay and deal with all the logistics of, which costs thousands of dollars to retrieve their loved one and bring them back home for proper burial and memorial service. So the companies will go retrieve their cargo, their truck, but they won't help the families whose driver either died in an accident or of some other issue. And that's really just tragic. But it just kind of it's just one aspect of how companies treat truck drivers and people on the road. These are essential jobs, um, with
Well,
very low unionization rates. Um, and it's a dangerous job, not only because you're on the road, driving these huge trucks on highways day in and day out and working long hours, but you're sitting for long periods of time. That's not healthy. Weird hours, working throughout the night shift. If workers are forced to do that, is very unhealthy. And the access to your truck stops and things like that, you're not have that availability of being able to rely on a grocery store, like most people are. So you're dealing with all these other health issues on top of just the brutal lifestyle. So to just get back more to the question, I think there's some pockets of organization going on for truck drivers, but it's still very sparse. And I think it comes to pushing back on solutions the industry is trying to do. Like we saw recently a teen program to get teenage truck drivers, because you need to be, I think, 21 to have a CDL, and now they're training 18-year-olds to try to get new people in. And a lot of those training programs are deceptive and just exploit people to get more money without actually you know providing them with a good paying job with benefits and union representation.
right. Well, Mike, I appreciate the time you spent with me today. Let everyone know where they can find more of your work, please.
I'm in the Guardian on a regular basis, so that's 99% of the work I do. I also do a monthly column for the Real News, and um, you know, just follow me on Facebook or Twitter, Sainato. I regularly post my work, or try to post and let people know about ongoing union related issues and stories that typically aren't really you're going to see in a lot of media outlets. Um, yeah.
I tell you what, I think you should talk to Jordan Sheraton offline. I think that you could probably work hand in glove with him. He's doing a lot of this stuff, and together you guys might be able to help each other get more and more and more visibility. I really think that would be a great fit. And regardless, it's so good to see you again, man. It's been years. I miss you. I'm glad to see you're doing well. And I look forward to reading more of your work, Mike.
Well, thanks, Steve. I appreciate it, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
Fantastic. And I will take you up on that. So, folks, my name's Steve Grumbine, my friend Mike Sainato, the Rogue Scholar on Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. We're out of here, folks.